Political polarization has increased due to the decline in religious affiliation.
And there are other factors at play.
The American Religious Town Hall meeting is now in session.
Welcome, friends, to the American Religious Town Hall meeting, where the discussion of religious, political, and social issues is meant to promote the cause of religious freedom and to help us better understand each other. And now, here's your host and moderator, Pastor Jerry Lutz.
I'm James Weingartner, sitting in for Pastor Lutz, and it's so good to have you with us. We've assembled a panel to discuss today's topic, and we would like to introduce that panel to you, and we'll begin with Bishop Michael OLSON.
My name is Bishop Michael OLSON, and I'm a Roman Catholic, and I serve as the Bishop of the Diocese of Fort Worth, Texas.
Hi, I'm Carl Trovall. I'm Professor of Ethics and History at Concordia University in Austin, Texas.
My name is Canon John Peterson. I am an Episcopal priest, and I'm canonically resident in the Diocese of Washington, D.C.
Hello, I'm Tony Matthews, and I'm the Senior Pastor at North Garland Baptist Fellowship in Garland, Texas.
We have a subject today about religious activism and polarization. From 1937 to 1980, church membership in the United States consistently stayed around 70% of the population. In the last 20 years, however, church membership has dropped precipitously to around 50%, the sharpest decline in American history. At the same time, the percentage of agnostics, nuns, that's spelled N-O-N-E-S, atheists, and those who affiliate with no religious group have increased to 25% of the population, the greatest percentage recorded in U.S. history. Shadi Hamid uses this data to argue in the April 2021 issue of The Atlantic magazine that just as Christianity's influence has declined and its membership has dropped, Americans' polarization and divisions have become more pronounced. Moreover, he believes these trends are correlated. Unlike World War II, the Cold War, and even 9/11, when a common enemy kept certain unity among Americans, that unity has disintegrated into a deeper ideological intensity with the decline of religious affiliation. As religious beliefs diminish, people turn increasingly to political identities and visions of the future, Hamid argues. Our political debates have even mirrored the mutual condemnations that theological disputes used to take. Even anathemas are now common as political leaders cancel each other. In light of these issues, we'd like our panelists to consider some of the following questions. Number one, do you agree with Shadi Hamid's thesis that political polarization has increased with the decline of religious affiliation? Two, what are the causes of the rise of polarization in the United States, and how does it relate to religious membership? And three, do people turn to politics to answer their ultimate questions of meaning when there is a loss of religious identity? Really good and important questions. Looking forward to hearing your answers. Carl?
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. And to jump right in, I found this article in The Atlantic magazine to be pretty fascinating. And I'm sure all of you know, as well as you know, that causation and correlation are two separate things. And to say one thing is causing another is always a little bit dangerous territory. Just because two things happen at the same doesn't mean there's a cause effect. It could just be two things that maybe are caused by a third effect. And honestly, reading the article, it's so easy to read, and I found it interesting and I found it compelling initially, but then of course, as often happens, I start wondering, well, is that really the case? But I do think that people all look for identity, security, and meaning somewhere. And I mean, it could be the stock market, it could be faith, it could be anything. And I think there are people whose identities are completely wrapped around political ideology. And so I could see that as people move away from a kind of belief in in God or a traditional religious organization, that they might turn to politics, because politics offers a certain kind of transcendence. You're part of a large group that has a movement. You have a vision of the future, like often religions do, about a better world, and you see that your vision is the way to do it. There are a lot of parallels, which unfortunately in the history of our world, they've been collapsed terribly and to terrible effect. And so I think that he has a case here. I mean, I think there are a lot. By the way, I meant this book by Ezra Klein. It's called Why We're Polarized. I mean, he hardly even touches on the religious question in here. So that's another interesting factor too, because there are a lot of reasons for polarization. I know you're going to jump into some of those, but one thing though that he does reveal in here, Ezra Klein said this, is that he said issue-based polarization leads to political-based polarization. And he said that one of the reasons why we're polarized is because we're sorting out differently. Whereas you had different competing ideologies, for instance, about the civil rights movement, once you get past, once the Dixiecrats leave the Democratic Party, things are sorted, and so your party represents more your kind of belief and worldview consistently. But on religion, he says this. In 2014, Pew Research said the largest religious group in the GOP was evangelical Protestant, and that the largest group in the Democratic Party was the nuns. And then he went on to say this, and he's quoting a researcher. In 2002, 50% of the GOP and 52% of the Democrats, which virtually is the same percentage, said it's not necessary to believe in a God to be moral. So it seemed like there's this kind of equivalency there. But then in 2017, he said it had shifted. 47% of the GOP said that it wasn't necessary to believe in a God, whereas 64% of Democrats said it wasn't necessary to believe in God. Now, I don't know how to parse that information other than there seems to be a secularizing trend, maybe more so among Democrats than Republicans, but it nevertheless raises some interesting questions.
Thanks. Michael?
That's a very good topic, very interesting discussion so far, Carl. Just two anecdotes, if I can, by way of introduction. One was I was introduced, at a gathering in my diocese a number of years ago in a Catholic group, and the introduction was meant to be, on the part of the one who did the introducing, complimentary or warm, and one of the things the MC said was, well, we're very glad to have him as our bishop, even if we don't agree with his political positions at times. Now, I found it striking because, and really out of line, because I don't have political positions in the sense of a politician or a government official. I'm there to teach and to govern and to sanctify is the vocation of a bishop. And I found that a little disturbing in a Catholic grade, and I addressed it in as warm a way as I am valued by the group that introduced me. But the second anecdote is this, and I was in Rome a year and a half ago, and I was at a meeting with the Holy Father and the other bishops, and the Pope, as he does, he says, ask me anything, let's talk about whatever you want to talk about, the time is yours. So I said, all right. I said, Holy Father, this is an election year. And I said, one of the challenges we face as pastors is that even the people that come to church that are identifying strong enough with their Catholic faith as to show up is they don't agree with everything, and their real religion is their partisan politics. That's what binds them together in a value. I said, what do we do? And he says it's very difficult, which was appreciated. And he said, you have to pray first, and you have to counsel them to pray. And then he said, don't tell them how to vote. He said, they're going to ask you and demand and coax you and to tell them who to vote for. And he said, don't touch it, it's the devil. It was very, I said, well, that's good enough for me. He said, preach the gospel. And he said, say, this is what Jesus says, this is how we as the church teach that, and put it back on them for their prayer. And I think there's a couple of things to learn with this, is that because in order to have a religion, you have to have a belief that there's somehow a power bigger than yourself. All right, and I don't think we're convinced of that generally in our culture. I think we have so many things at our immediate disposal, including social media, and that we not only do we not need God anymore, we don't think we need other human beings. And I think this is a side effect that's been even manifested with COVID, is that people are responding more violently to each other because there's no higher power than their ego and themselves. And so then their partisan politics, in a sense, becomes somewhat of a religion, as long as it agrees with them at that time. And so if you don't have a transcendental understanding of God, or somehow that there's something more powerful than you, than anyone, and more stable and more consistent, more loving, then you're going to shape a God after your own image. And, and we have a group of people who are self-made people who worship their maker. And so I think that's the challenge today before us, and it's and I think it cuts across all party lines. Thank you, Tony.
Well, I so appreciate those words and the words of Dr. Troval here. The statement that just as Christianity's influence has declined and its membership has dropped, America's polarization and divisions have become more pronounced. Moreover, he believes these trends are correlated. I am grappling with that again. I don't know if there is a correlation. I don't know if you can just, because there's a lot of folks in churches who, what we call transfer growth, they will leave one church and go to another church simply because of politics. In fact, I was doing some research with Lifeway Research and the Pew Research, and one study says that people are going to join churches, and they're joining churches based on politics. 46% of Protestant churchgoers say they prefer to join a church based on the political affinity. And I think that's really sad, so it's almost like politics are trumping theology. And then it raises the question, do pastors, what are they preaching? Are they, if you preach through books in the Bible, you're going to touch on some of these political issues. If you preach on through books or through topics, it's impossible not to touch on some of these issues. And then another question that Lifeway Research has is, will people leave your church over politics? There was a time, a long time ago, when folks used to fight over the carpet. They would leave church over the color of the carpet, over capital campaigns, what the pastor says and all that. But nowadays, people will leave church, according to this article, that they will leave based on American politics. Now, the polarization piece comes in. At our church, and I've been very frustrated over the last year with the pandemic, and I've been on record saying it to our folks that it's been so discouraging and disappointing, more than discouraging, to see our members polarized politically. I mean, just, having, social media wars and fighting and feuding based on politics. It's just totally discouraging. So this is, some people leave because of politics. They go to a church that kind of aligns, with their political views, and other people will stay, based on, for the unity of the body. Can we worship the Lord together and serve the Lord together and have different political views? And I think that's something that we need to consider doing.
John?
I'd like to ask Michael a question, because I think that you really hit on a very important subject when you talked about the wonderful presentation that this man made before you spoke, the introduction. You said that his response was, although we do not like sometimes your politics.
Right.
Do you think that the politics he was talking about here is the politics of the gospel that you were talking about?
Oh no, I think he was. I think he was. I mean,
because you don't identify yourself
No,
with
I
any
don't
political
identify,
party.
no,
So what
no.
could he be referring to except the gospel?
It is. That's exactly it. And I think is at the time it's just simply that. I guess the point I'm making is that he had his framework of politics, and he's evaluating the gospel or Catholic social teaching or the dignity and the right to life and the importance of that selectively as how does it fit in with his own brand of orthodoxy. And I think there's less compromise in our political life because we've turned to politics and inflicted a doctrine. We've removed it from the practical art of governance, and we've taken it into this sort of godless theoretical dogma that is unforgiving and entrenched.
Yeah, it seems to me that the gospel, if you preach the gospel, you're taking a radical stand in relationship to justice and all those concerns that we have.
Absolutely.
That are today are quite disturbing for many people.
That's right. Absolutely.
I want to urge the listening audience today, that if you've not heard of Shadi Hamid, I'd like to emphasize Carl's high recommendation that he gave to him in the Atlantic magazine. And I'm not trying to push the Atlantic magazine, but you can read it online, actually. So it's an excellent article that he's written. And he argues that Christianity's hold today, in particular, has weakened. Ideology intensified, and fragmentation has risen. But he then has a very key sentence that I think is very important. He says, American faith, as it turns out, is as fervent as ever. It's just that what was once understood to be religious belief has now been channeled into political belief. And it seems to me that is really the key of the issue that we are discussing here, that what was once the gospel is now being channeled into political belief. And he goes on to say that America itself is almost a religion. As Catholic philosopher Michael Novak once put it, particularly for immigrants that come to their new identity with the zeal of the converted. The American civic religion has its own founding myth, its prophets as well as its scriptures, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and the Federalist Papers. And then he quotes Martin Luther King. When Martin Luther King, in his famous I Have a Dream speech, King wished that one day this nation will rise up and live out its true meaning of its creed. And Hamid asks the question, when before it's the church, it's religion that has a creed, and not a nation?
Interesting. Yeah.
Well, I think there's a lot to be said for that. I think sociologists of religion, they distinguish between the functional sense of religion and the substantive sense of religion. So in other words, that religion can perform a function. You know, it ritualizes, it provides symbol, it performs a social act, and it ritualizes that act. It mitigates difficult conversations, all these sorts of things. But ultimately, the question I ask for with a religion is, well, what is the God that's behind it? And I mean, you can have a religion without a God, but it's a frightening thing. Mm-hmm. You know, if it's not a forgiving God, if it's not, a God that's merciful, even a God that is just. Mm-hmm.
I keep noticing that we have these church members. For those of us who are pastors, Tony, we have these church members who come with an awful lot of baggage that they've heard on the news, and they have all these the trappings. And the real issue, I think, as preachers, is that our job is not to baptize all the baggage off, but one sermon at a time, chip it off, chip it off until they're back to the gospel, the gospel.
I was going to say, I wondered how much we facilitated this as religious leaders in our own identity with our faith and America. I mean, it's the American Religious Town Hall meeting. We're talking about religion. We have the flag, right? I mean, are we doing that ourselves by connecting America as a kind of creed or civic religion?
We'll talk about that a little bit more on summation. Let's go to our break right now.
We hope you are enjoying today's program. If you would like to learn more about the American Religious Town Hall, please visit our website at americanreligious.org. That's americanreligious.org. There you can read about the mission and history of the program, learn about the Town Hall estates, and view past programs by clicking the appropriate menu buttons. Each week, Pastor Lutz looks forward to receiving your letters. You may write to him at the address shown on your screen. Send your letters to Pastor Jerry Lutz, American Religious Town Hall Meeting, P.O. Box 180118, Dallas, Texas 75218. That's Pastor Jerry Lutz, American Religious Town Hall Meeting, P.O. Box 180118, Dallas, Texas 75218. Thank you for writing, and thank you for watching. And now, back to you and today's closing statements.
Welcome back. We do care. This program, the American Religious Town Hall, has been going now for 60 years, and we don't do it for our own benefit. We do it for you. So if there's a program topic that you'd like to hear addressed, or you have some suggestions or ideas or comments, we'd love to hear from you about those. So go ahead and send them to us and let us know. And now it's time for our summations, and we'll begin with Michael.
Most of the religionists do in fact have the functional equivalent of a religion. Even if they reject the label and claim to be religious or not religious or anti-religious, they do have consistent worldviews and value systems that render for them those of the traditional religions irrelevant. The traditional religions don't seem to have much to do with their daily life. However, ultimately a religion's going to be judged on how the influence it has on daily life, and also does it put you into touch with a good God, a God that provides for the human person in those areas of which the human person is powerless, but is yet accountable for life. I think that remains to be seen, and I think we're in a period right now of transition and, if you will, recapitulation.
Thank you. John?
Although the United States was not founded as a Christian nation, Christianity has always been intertwined with America's self-identification. And without it, Americans, conservatives as well as liberals alike, no longer have a common culture upon which to fall. And I think that this is one of the issues that we are facing today as a civil society. On reflection, Hamid says something very interesting, that while we certainly have a decline in religion today, and we know that by the statistic of 47%, he raises the concern, if religions are not around to help us teach basic values, justice, you shall not lie, you shall not covet, you shall not be indifferent, what would take that place? And that religion has an extremely important role here, and it is not a downside unless we make it a downside. And that it is so important that religion continues to be able to teach the basic values of society.
Thank you, John.
Yeah, I think that's so important. Three really quick things here as I just pondered over this whole thing. The Christian nationalism is coming to my mind when thinking about politics and the flag and, religion. And I think it was Francis Schaeffer who said, whenever you see the flag wrapped in Christianity, something very unholy has taken place. And then the next thing is that the whole decline language, the church is very strong. The gates of hell would not prevail against it. And I know that church health is not always determined by who joins, but who leaves. And third, I heard one pastor, or somebody told me that a pastor mentioned this, is that he told his congregation that a lot of you guys are leaving your church because of politics. How many of you are willing to leave your politics for the sake of the church?
Right.
Wow.
And I think those are things that I thought about those things as I read this.
Carl.
Wow, that's quite a thought.
That was
there.
huge, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was. Well, it's really interesting because you have this claim about the sharpest decline in American history. I understand the sharpest decline, but you do realize that at the founding of the nation, there was only 10% of Americans were affiliated with the church tradition, right? I mean, it was a highly secularized or unactive religiously nation, and I suppose maybe they were the most contentious because they rebelled against Britain. I don't know, but. What I'm saying, and then I'm thinking about the polarization. I mean, the Civil War. I don't know if you can think of a stronger polarization in America, and so to me, there are just a lot of countervailing issues here that I just don't know that the dots can be drawn as clearly as he seems to make them. Although I think that what all of you point out is that our sense of what the gospel is not Americanism, and that we need to work hard as religious leaders to make sure that those distinctions are crisp and that people don't falsely idolize the nation or the political party in lieu of really what God, at least as Christians, what God is calling us to do in Christ.
It's really interesting. We're on a show, as you point out, called the American Religious Town Hall. And what we're doing, I'm a pretty patriotic guy. We're celebrating the freedom that we have to be or not be religious. And that's really exciting to me because here we are, able to be any or no religion, and yet the religions are fighting for you, the religions are fighting for the gospel, and there are lots of people who are just saying no, and that's just okay. The charter of the American Religious Town Hall provides that Roman Catholics, Protestants, Jews, educators, and others may appear on this program and can declare their beliefs without hesitancy. And the rest of the members of the panel will uphold and guarantee that American right to all who will appear, irrespective of race or creed, so that the rest of the world can see that here in America, we believe in civil and religious freedom, not only in theory, but in reality. And now, friends, until next week, at the same time and over the very same channel, the American Religious Town Hall meeting stands adjourned. May the God of all of us bless all of you. Thank you.